What I'd like to talk about is what happened with GameStop, because I think it's such an interesting sign of the times. I think two things happened. The first is that the people on Reddit were able to expose corruption, to crystallize it and hold it up to view. Corruption in the system, systemic corruption. And secondly, that a lot of ordinary people got pulled in and enticed in and are probably now feeling tempted to get into a booming but unproductive sector of the economy, the speculative sector. Now, this wasn't really about people power. It was much more about hedge funds versus hedge funds. Hedge funds fighting each other, betting against each other, with the retail investors acting at best as catalysts or as at worst as sacrificial lambs. Now, the small investors, the little people, the likes of you and me, went onto Reddit, and they did what small people usually do, which is to observe and to do a bit of research and to get the worm's eye view. And they found, well, there are a lot of people selling shares in GameStop, or rather agreeing to sell shares in the future. Shorting is where you say, I will sell you this share at today's price in a week's time or in a month's time. And if the price goes, effectively betting that the price will go down, because if you do that then and the price goes down, you make money. And then that caused people on Reddit to say, why don't we? They noticed that those short sellers had sold or agreed to sell more shares than all the shares that existed in GameStop, which you would think ought to be illegal. People selling things that they don't own. And what they spotted was, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. If we buy shares and the price goes up, those big hedge funds will lose money, and then they'll have to come to us and buy the shares off them in order to be able to sell them to the people they've agreed to sell them to. And that acted as a trigger for other hedge funds then to come in and say, there's an opportunity, we can bet big on, we can buy these shares or go long, agree to buy them in the future, which pushes up the price of those shares, so it'll harm the competition and make us money. Then in response to that, the ones who had gone short, i.e. agreed to sell shares at some stage in the future, they looked at the share price going up and said, well, the share price was irrational before, it's crazy now, let's double down, let's agree to sell even more shares in the future and we'll make even more money because these prices are just crazy. And it ended up with 140% of all of GameStop shares, all the shares that existed in GameStop having been agreed to be sold. And in response to that, other hedge funds thought, we can double down, to compare that, we'll double down even harder, and we will make really big losses for these other firms when they eventually have to sell these shares they thought were going to go down and have now gone up in price. And eventually the companies that had gone in and had short sold, agreed to sell their shares in the future, they then capitulated. They then gave in. Probably the advisor who'd said, let's make money by short selling GameStop shares, he goes into the office, he's not flavour of the month, and his boss says, no, we're not listening to you anymore, we just have to get out of this position even if it loses us a lot of money. And so what they did then was to buy up those shares and sell them to the people they'd agreed to sell them to. So when they bought, that was the peak of the share price. And then when they passed them on to the people they'd agreed to sell to, that was when the share price started to go down. And then the companies, the ones who'd bet against them and said, we think, or we're going to agree to buy shares in the future, they then sold the options that they had to buy those shares, effectively selling those shares. The price went down further, and the people they effectively sold those shares to were probably other big hedge funds who normally balance out their share trade. So if they buy a share on one hand, they'll sell it on the other. So they sold shares as well, and we went down to the low point that the share price is at today, which is where it was before this spike happened. It went down very fast, I think going down in something like 50 or 60% in a day. And the lessons of this are twofold. Firstly, corruption in the system was exposed, and that corruption enabled, it's a corrupt system that enabled big buyers and sellers of shares, market makers, that's the big companies who buy and sell shares on their own account and act as brokers holding shares on behalf of other people. They were able to sell 140% of shares, of GameStop shares, so more shares than existed in GameStop, which is supposedly, you would think it should be illegal, and apparently it is. That's what's called naked shorting. If you agree to sell something that you can't readily get your hands on, then that is illegal. But there is an exemption because it's seen as creating the wealth effect, basically multiplying financial transactions. The American Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, likes that. It tends to focus. As a result, since 2008, there has been this fiction that the number of financial transactions it creates value. So if the number of financial transactions is a good substitute for valuable financial transactions, which it isn't, but that is getting pushed. Money getting lent into the economy, so you can get more and more of these financial transactions going on, even though they don't create a lot of value. They're simply a boom in the financial markets caused by too much money getting lent into the financial markets. And now the way the exemption works for the big hedge funds and the brokerages is that if you buy a share in GameStop, a broker will hold that share on your behalf, and that broker is allowed to lend that share to someone else, who then sells it to a third party, who then might buy it and hold it with a brokerage, who then lends it out to someone else, who then themselves sells it, so that the same share can get sold multiple times over. And that is permissible. That is not illegal. That is naked shorting, but it is not illegal naked shorting. And it's very similar to the what was known as fractional reserve banking, but appears to be fictional reserve banking, where banks, you put $100 into an American bank account, they can lend out the whole, effectively, they're able to lend out the whole of that to another bank. It's via a system called sweeps and various exemptions that exist. The whole of that can get lent out to someone else who spends it, and then the person who receives it banks it, and that bank can then lend it out again. So it gets lent out multiple times over without any reserve getting retained. The difference is that with bank lending, fractional reserve or fictional reserve lending, that is backed by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, the American Central Bank, basically says to those banks, we've got your back. If there's a crunch and you find you have a cash flow problem, you don't have enough money in reserve to meet all the people trying to take the demands of all the people trying to take their money out, we will come along and lend you some more money to paper over the gap so that you can survive. And but both are happening. That the reserve or the fractional or fictional reserve lending by banks and this excessive shorting of shares in companies like GameStop, both are happening because there is too much money. It's an over-leveraged economy with too much money getting pumped in, lent into the economy, and as a result of that, careful investors get ridiculed. So Captain Mannering, the bank manager in Dad's Army, he's ultra cautious. He is a figure of ridicule today because you don't need to be cautious. You can be reckless today because if it goes wrong, if it blows up, the Federal Reserve will enable you to survive. That is a rigged casino. And Reddit, the people on Reddit, exposed the corruption in the system, that manipulation, the ability to manipulate the value of shares in a company like GameStop. And they exposed it so successfully that they brought the hostility to the big hedge funds and the market makers. They brought that hostility to a head, and I think that hostility was universal, and it also took on the nature of blind hostility. It was universal. You had Ted Cruz on the right wing of the Republican Party, and Senator Cruz, and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez on the left of the Democrat Party, both of them coming out expressing their hostility to these big hedge funds, not doing anything about it, but expressing their hostility, and in particular criticising the Robinhood app, the share dealing app, which when the price of the Robinhood shares started going up, just spiking up, going vertical, the Robinhood app said, this looks artificial, we're now going to stop people buying shares in GameStop. You can only sell shares in GameStop. And people on Reddit and individuals said, this is unfair. We as individuals are being prevented from buying shares in GameStop, but the big hedge funds, the big market makers, they're not being prevented from buying shares. This is unfair. It is allowing the big companies to carry on manipulating. What I think really was happening is that the US regulators were noticing an artificial movements, manipulated movements in GameStop share prices as it went up and up, and thought we need to protect individual investors from that, or supposedly we need to protect them. But individual investors said, no, well, why aren't you protecting the big hedge funds? Why are you just protecting us by restricting us? And what I think is the inevitable outcome of a rigged casino, a share market, a financial market that has too much money, too much credit being pumped into it, which is something that those politicians, including Cruz and Ocasio-Cortez, they're going along with it. We are going along with it because it seems to be keeping the system alive. It seems to be keeping employment and prosperity, or at least the numbers, going, even if that appearance of prosperity isn't backed up with value in production. But that the universal nature of that hostility to the big funds, the big banks and the hedge funds, and the kind of blindness of that hostility, that is a symptom of this, that is indicative of the strength of that hostility. And that is a sign that if, and I would say when, the system breaks down, it will break down hard. It will fall a long way, as it always does. And as usual, historically, it isn't the politicians or the foreigners who get attacked first. It is the financiers, the big financiers. They're the ones who get strung up over lampposts. And you can see an example of this if you look at a man called Joseph François Foulon. He was a big financier who was strung up in 1789, right at the beginning of the French Revolution. You can see an account of it in chapter 22 of Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It's pretty gruesome stuff. I'll read out a bit of it later. But that hostility is strong. The blindness of hostility is a tribute to the strength of that hostility to those investors. So we're allowing it to go on, but we really don't like it. We can't stand that it is enriching the high rollers in the rigged casino so much. And the blindness of the hostility I can see is you can see it in two or three ways. Firstly, that the short sellers, I don't think they're actually the bad guys. The problem with this pumped up bubble economy is not that there are too many people questioning the value of shares and saying actually this company is overvalued. It's that there are too few. Now and the strength of that hostility again can be seen in one particular a short selling organisation headed by a man called Andrew Left, Clifton Research. He's apparently quite a famous short seller in the States. And he said, I'll leave a link to the little video, the 2-minute video, where he said, I'm getting out of this now. I don't like all the hatred. He's got, to my eye, quite a repulsive manner. But what he's saying is I think, right. He's saying, by questioning the value of companies, we have uncovered fraud. And we have brought share prices back down to where they realistically should be. We've pricked the bubble occasionally by questioning the share price, which is what we're supposed to do. And that's backed up by research. Big major studies that followed the 2008 financial crisis, when government said things are falling apart, we've got to do something. I know, let's prohibit short selling. The research that was done on those, one in 2018, a 2018 European study and a 2013 American study, found that it actually increased volatility. It increased the difference between the price at which you can buy and sell shares, so the profit that the big market makers, the brokerages, the ones who buy and sell shares on their own account and perhaps buy and sell them to you or hold them on your behalf, it increased the profits that they can make by effectively preventing people from questioning and doing in and out deals on shares. So I think also the blindness of that hostility is you can see that in the second lesson from the whole GameStop affair, and that is that it has pulled and enticed ordinary people to get into the speculative, unproductive sector of the economy, where they're probably going to lose money, and a lot of them already have, and it's unfair. The financial sector it's just much bigger than ordinary individuals. What you had was a lot of individuals stereotypically receiving stimmy checks from the American government, and then instead of putting it in the bank and living on it, thinking, well, what can I do? I'm out of work, I'll invest it. Where shall I invest it? Let's invest in GameStop. The price of those shares is going up, maybe I'll make some money, and I can stick it to the man. I hate those big investors. They're making all the money and I'm not. I'm out of work. I'm living on a stimmy check. And that is dangerous for them. They are not big enough to do to the GameStop shares what happened to the GameStop shares. Simply the size of the deals in GameStop shares was much bigger than ordinary retail investors could have put in. It was hedge funds betting against other hedge funds, and there were other companies that went up an awful lot more. On the 27th of January, the same day, you had 5 companies that went up much more than the 135% that GameStop went up in one day. There was one called Tian Rushiang Holdings that went up 538% on that day, and that is hedge fund money piling into those shares. And the small investors did research and then talked about it on Reddit, and that was the trigger, and that triggered the bigger hedge funds to get in, and they were able to bet much larger volumes. Now this seems to me, I think this represents another round of speculative mania in this over-leveraged economy with too much money pumped into it, albeit with an ideological twist, i.e. you as the small guy, you can stick it to the big guy. But and I think that is likely to continue for some time to come, because what you have is central banks printing money, not spending it, but lending it into the economy, lending it to governments who spend it, or lending it to big banks who then lend it out to other people and to businesses. That pumps up the money that's available to get invested in assets, particularly in the financial sector. But it doesn't in fact create inflation. You'd think it would. All this money chasing money, it would drive up prices and it would create inflation. It drives up asset prices, but it's not driving up the everyday consumer prices that get measured by the inflation, the measure of inflation. And the reason appears to be that when that money is lent into the economy, it creates activity to begin with, but it's a bit like taking crystal meth. You feel good for a while, then you wake up with a bad hangover. You wake up, what you've got afterwards is that debt hanging over you, and the hit that you get, the production, the activity that's created each time more money is lent into the economy reduces, so you get less of a hit and a bigger hangover each time, and that depresses the economy. That's why we keep seeing reduced inflation, because the debt pile gets bigger overhanging the economy. So I think that means that this over-leveraged, over-financialized economy is likely to continue for a few more years, I'd say 5 or 6 years, because governments are able to say, listen, we're creating this wealth effect, we're increasing the number of transactions, and it's not accompanied by inflation. aren't we clever? Look at those employment numbers. Look at the numbers on the stock market. The economy is booming. It's not. It just looks like it is because the numbers are being manipulated. And that is something to be wary of. Don't participate in bubbles. It's a bad idea. Everyone thinks they're going to be the one who gets out of the top, and they never are. It's kind of unethical or wrong to the extent that you're asking to lose your money, and you're asking to be told you deserve to lose your money. You're asking to be told, serve you right. And that is another message, I think. Personally, I think it is unfair the way individuals are being encouraged and enticed to get in at the top, perhaps by what's called pump and dump merchants, people who say, look at the price of this company, it's going up and up and up, get in quick and make money. And then they, when it goes up, and they're secretly planning to sell after the price goes up, go in, buy and hold, and they might sell themselves. I don't have any evidence to say that any individual was doing that, but I think it's reckless to bring ordinary people into a heavily financialized, a heavily indebted financial market when it's near to the top. And big investors prey on small investors. It's what happens time and time again. You get that the market starts booming. This happened before 1929. The share market starts booming. Ordinary people see that it's booming. The word goes around, you can make money, you can get rich. Just put a bit of money into the markets. And ordinary people do, not realizing it's getting near to the top. They put the money in, and then it breaks. And then the big investors say, hey, we can sell out now. We can sell to the small guy, take our gains. And then the small guy is left holding the bag when it breaks down. And the small investors don't have the advantages that the big investors have. They don't have the pile of money. They don't have the Federal Reserve backing them up, promising to lend them money if they get into cash flow problems. They don't have the connections. They don't have the information and research. They don't have access to the underlying information, what's referred to as level 2 information. They don't have the experience or the coldness that the big institutions have. So no matter how clever you are, you're likely to get eaten up by the big firms. And I wonder if some of the cheerleaders on the GameStop saga, if they knew precisely what they were doing. I don't know, I have no evidence for that, but I'm not aware of any of them saying, get into GameStop, you can stick it to the man, and also you can make money, and here's how you can then get your money out again at the end of it. I think they just said, get in, buy the shares and hold, and then people did, and now have lost money. That's from the little that I've seen anyway. And it is not good to buy when things that are overvalued. Don't participate in bubbles, even if you feel it gives you revenge against the big guy. It's still, that is not a good, revenge isn't a good idea. It is not good to lose money in order to take revenge. Don't act out of anger. Don't throw away your money out of anger. If you want revenge on the big guy, the big financiers, well, just wait for the system to break down. There'll be plenty of anger to go round against them. And I'll read out what happened to that Joseph Francois Foulon just before the French Revolution. The economy was collapsing and he got strung over a lamppost. And the phrase à la lanterne, meaning to the lamppost, that was coined when he got hanged. And according to well, he was a big financier to the king and made a lot of money. He was hated by the populace. They felt that he was squeezing them dry, getting money, getting taxes out of them wherever he could. And when they got hold of him, he was, quotes, according to Wikipedia, made to walk barefoot. He had a bundle of hay tied to his back, was given peppered vinegar to drink, and had the sweat on his face wiped off with nettles. And as he was hanged from a lamppost, the rope broke 3 times in a row. So members of the crowd decided to behead him instead, before parading his head on a pike with his mouth stuffed with grass, hay and excrement. And the way Charles Dickens put it, much better writing, Charles Dickens said, once he went aloft and the rope broke and they caught him shrieking. Twice he went aloft and the rope broke and they caught him shrieking. Then the rope was merciful and held him, and his head was soon upon a pike with grass enough in the mouth for all of Saint-Antoine to dance at the sight of. So take a step back. There'll be plenty of people wanting to get the big guy when the system breaks down. Don't join in and lose money out of anger. Stay out of bubbles. Thank you.